your preferred partner for custom software development and technology outsourcing. We offer state-of-the-art customized software development services that are client-centric, flexible, and secure to empower businesses.
Well, it is great to be here. As Carl mentioned, just bringing people together is just awesome. And it's been, 18 months ago on this stage in Fort Lauderdale. So lots changed in some cases not much has changed. Again, I'm Scott Schwalbe, co-founder of NimbeLink, now part of AirGain, and on stage here with me is David Gustafson from Smart Logistics. And I'll be turning it over to Dave here for an introduction and to take over the stage for a little bit. As Carl mentioned, what we're going to talk about today is supply chain and asset tracking and optimization of supply chain. Typically, throughout the years, we heard a lot today about technology. We're not going to talk about technology too much today. We're really going to talk about the business case because it's happening. Companies are out there and we are solving real-world problems. There's return on investments, and we thought today would be just a good opportunity to really kind of talk about that, talk about the real-world opportunities, what's going on, obviously, all the technology behind that, and just a little quick introduction with NimbeLink. We're all cellular. We actually help solve those hard cellular connectivity issues for our customers. If our customers succeed, we succeed. We create very flexible, dynamic solutions that are configurable at the edge for cellular connectivity, and that's what we do. But what's really exciting about this is as the technology is evolving, and it's here now today, and we are solving these problems. And this is really what we're going to kick it off because we don't have a lot of time, and I'll just turn the stage over to you, David, and let you introduce yourself, introduce Smart, and then just dive right into the case study, and we'll see if we can get. This is the connector, I think, here, so you should be able to just push that green button. It looks like to move slides ahead.
Be hard to screw that up.
All right, have fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll echo what everyone else said. It's really nice to be out of the house again and with everyone. So thank you for being here. My name is David Gustafson. I'm one of the founders of Smart Logistics. We are one of those technology companies that doesn't develop a ton of technology. We leverage a lot of technology, and our real focus is building the connective tissue for different technologies to serve our customers' needs. Most of what we do, and what I'm going to share some of with you today, is really around asset tracking. Everyone wants to talk about supply chain visibility, but upstream of supply chain visibility and what you can get with that, if you could just bring that into being, it'd be a great thing. Short of that, you really need to build the business case on things like managing mobile assets. And much of what we do today at Smart Logistics, with our customers is bringing digital identity and management to those things after they've left their factory floors. So when they go out in the wild and they have no more control over them, we introduce some management, some controls. And the impact it's having is transformative, very transformative. Before I get into that, I'd like to ask, is anyone here doing any asset management, asset tracking, things that go out in the field and you're tracking them somehow by hook or by crook today, by show of hands? I see none. No. Okay, thank you. What kind of asset are you tracking, sir? Garbage cans. Great, don't want to run out of those. Things will get bad quickly. Anyone else? Please. Gunshot detection devices. Fascinating. Okay. Thank you. Yes?
We have detected and discovered computers in a network.
Computers in a network. Very good. Very good. So, three pretty divergent, different, disparate things. And the idea behind it is how do we create the business case with the same technologies to do effectively what those companies need, right? And as often as not, that's where Scott and I collaborate and come in to play. Today I'm going to talk about reusable packaging assets as an example for the larger whole. We can get into any one of those, and actually I'd like to talk with you guys about those later on at the booth. But today, reusable packaging. So what is reusable packaging? Think in terms of, reusable pallets or bins or totes or racks. And they're increasingly an important part of how companies ship product to market. And largely on the industrial or commercial side, but also increasingly on the consumer or retail side. What's driving this? Why are we seeing, these things are much more expensive than single use. Why are we seeing them? Why are they happening? Partly because the single use is getting a lot more expensive. Everyone's heard lately about the cost of wood and lumber and timber. Pallet prices are through the roof. Get a reusable pallet that can be used not just 1 or 2 or 7 times, but for 7 years. Problem is it costs a lot more. You need to track it. You need to manage it. What's the business case for doing that? How do you go about doing that? Also, regulatory and compliance. Single-use products are wasteful. We frown on that, right? Reusable assets, much more efficient if you can effectively manage them. That's on the cost side. Customers are also increasingly demanding products, especially in the industrial world, be delivered to them in specialized packaging. Auto industry has been doing this for a long time. A lot of construction materials companies are doing this. They want products delivered to them in packaging that can go right into their automated systems. And when it's not, they charge their vendors because they have to put their hands on products. It's disruptive. It's a perturbation of their workflow. Things go bump in the night, and they don't like that. So the push to much more expensive, more reusable packaging assets is happening all over the place. But they're very expensive, and companies that need them, quite frankly, they're a little concerned. There's some trepidation about adopting them because once I send it out there, how do I know I'll get it back? And that's where we often come into play. Once they've done that, once they've adopted that, and then we all start to get a little excited about, okay, now what can we learn? We've done the cost, we've done the things that we thought were hard that actually are really just low-hanging fruit. We've figured out how to not lose money doing this. Now what insights can we drive into our business from doing that? And that's where it starts to get exciting. That's where it starts to get fun. So how do we do this? Cost is always the big motivator, or at least the initial motivator. Driving cost out of an existing system will get your people's attention, your customers' attention. Problem is, it becomes the new baseline. After you've been successful once and you've driven a ton of cost out of it, how do you prove your value the next day? So you need to, as you're tracking assets, you really need to track the program. And that's something that Scott and I have spent a great deal of time on with a handful of customers and really understanding, great, you saved me a ton of money in the first 6 months. What'd you do in the next 6 months? And how do I know it was good? And how do I make it better? And what do we do with that? These assets that we're using, that our customers are using, are terribly expensive, oftentimes, compared to a single-use product. Several hundred to several $1,000s. So losing them, it can be hard. It can be terribly impactful. I was with a customer 2 days ago on my way down here. And this is a factory, but they just spent $1 million on more shipping assets. They've stopped losing them, but they need more of them. And so companies are investing tremendous amounts of money into these things, but they can't lose them. They have to use them. Then you start getting into process measures like dwell time. How do we know we're doing a good job? Okay, we've stopped losing things. How much use are we getting out of them? These are simple metrics, but at the end of the day, real money falls out of this. You start equating these metrics of dwell time and utilization, thinking times in terms of turns, and there's genuine dollars. We have a customer we started with last year that Scott knows about. We did 800% ROI in the first year, and hard dollars, and showed them how. And now it's part of a recurring thing. In fact, I'll show you some of the, well, suitably redacted, but I'll show you some of the reports we've done from them. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, these specialized assets, they can proliferate. So I have one customer that needs this type of rack to fit into their manufacturing system. I have 20 other customers that have 20 other different types. You know, the SKU proliferation can be pretty intense. And I have to manage the inventories of all of those to maximize my opportunity. Well, it's hard to do with a spreadsheet. But if you're tracking them, if you're managing them, if you have a system approach to it, it's very, very attainable. This is a pretty redacted version of an asset or a report, a business review we've done for a customer. Now, we're from the upper Midwest. We don't like calling our customers thieves. We're polite that way. So instead we say the assets themselves go rogue, as opposed to you stole my assets. But how do we know they went rogue? Where did they go? How do I know that, they just weren't shipped to another place? Were they stolen? Did they get lost? You create some business rules. You work with the customer to figure out if this happens, if this set of circumstances happens, then we're going to call that lost. The truth of the matter is, because you're tracking it, you've never really lost it. But you have to go reclaim it, and that often has cost, which means you have to work with your customer to get your products back, to get that $2,000 rack back. Working through where these things are, where these assets are in your overall supply chain, can do two things. One, you'll never run out. You'll always know where they are, and you can cost effectively return them, right? But it also teaches you where you have the log jams in your system. And that too, once you figure that out, you streamline those things, ROI falls out of it. Real, genuine money falls out of it. At the end of the day, all these things take into account just by tracking assets. We're not even talking about real supply chain visibility yet, but just tracking assets. You can affect the profitability of a plant by a few percent. And any one of us sits down and talks to a plant manager and says, I'm going to help you get 2 or 3 more points gross margin out of your existing operations. You have their attention. Heck, you have more than their attention. You have the business. Here's another example. We've redacted some of it so you couldn't see which customers are, but you can start treating customers differently based on their behavior, how they're treating you and your assets. And what does that mean? At the end of the day, that customer I mentioned earlier, what if you can get in front of that $1 million purchase? How does that affect their business? Well, just by managing those assets better, you get more utilization. In this particular case, we were able to identify at a different customer 10,000 asset days. If we just brought down the amount of dwell time from 15 to 10 days. All we have to do is just know where they are, stay in communication with their customers, get them back a little more quickly. Suddenly we don't have that capital expense, we can do other things with the money. I'm racing through this. You guys have any questions? Shoot.
Get my mic back on. So, can you guys hear me? Is this better? Yeah, that's better. I'll just talk out of here. So, you're taking IoT into an industrial space of customers that really have never, most likely not connected things, not really understood this in the past. How do we go about educating an industrial customer that hasn't really thought about tracking their stuff?
Yeah, mostly we make it so that they don't have to do the adoption, at least not up front, right? Give them the service, give them, if you will, the benefit without having to go through the education, without having to go through all the business process change. Learn what's important to them and deploy the low-hanging fruit first. After that, it's easy to justify. It's an exercise, but it's totally doable to justify the resources to do more and more and more. You start showing them how they can stop losing these expensive assets, change the relationship with their customers, rather than getting on the phone and having their salespeople fight over getting the assets back. We shipped you a few hundred of these things. I got a couple hundred back. Where are the others? Arguing about who lost what. Have that salesperson's time be about ordering more product, not about getting racks back, not about getting totes or bins back, right? If you talk to your customers, you talk to the manufacturers especially, and you talk to their salespeople, they spend a disproportionate amount of their time what they call, quite frankly, customer service, not sales, trying to get the company's assets back from their customers so that they can then sell them more stuff. And it's disruptive.
Sure. And so if you have questions, just raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you. Got a couple here. I'm going to just ask one more while we're getting the mic over there.
Sure.
So I said it's not about the technology, but at the same time, as obviously the end customer doesn't care about the technology. They just want this data. They want it to work. But as you started thinking about, and you've been doing this for a while, and you've been involved with pallets, and you've been involved and started looking at the technology to actually be able to solve this, what was it that actually drove you to say, hey, cellular is the right connectivity versus some of the other low power. And I know you've tested all of them with RFID and Bluetooth and stuff. What was it that actually drove cellular?
Thank you. We started off work, I can't say, legally I'm not allowed to say the name of the company, but they're the largest protein producer in North America. I am legally, by their legal department, I'm allowed to describe them that way. There's only one of them, you can figure it out if you care. We were tracking 2,000-pound shipments of ground beef and tracking the temperature of it for a food safety, food quality perspective. That's going from one location to another. It really rarely gets lost. When you get to a point where things can go anywhere, you need coverage that is everywhere. And at the end of the day, cellular became the only solution to cover something as wide as, say, North America, where our customers' assets can go, because we don't know where they're going to end up. I mean, we're looking, I remember the first customer we had in asset tracking, we were running a pilot, and we literally spent 3 days watching something that was supposed to be in Wisconsin, a $2,000 shipping unit. And suddenly it's in Minnesota, then it went through the Dakotas, then it went to Montana, went up to Seattle, went down to Bend, Oregon. They had no business in Bend, Oregon. They had a customer in Wisconsin who then repurposed, again, they're polite, stole, took, used, whatever word you want, that asset, and we just watched it go west. And when it finally stopped moving, we knew the grid coordinates where they were, turned that into an address, called that company and said, you have our asset. And they said, is that yours? We've got 36 of them out back. We didn't know where they came from. We'll send them right over to you. Right? So you're right. They don't want to have to adopt technology. They don't want to have to implement technology. But they sure as heck want the value of it. So front load of the value, and then they understand what they need to do afterwards.
Great.
All right.
Please.
The question is, so you want to track your pallet, your customer wants to track their asset. So are they using your system in general? And then how do you figure out the value and so on? Do they have their own system for tracking their own asset independent of yours?
Sometimes they do. I mean, at the end of the day, I have in the past, I don't own the asset, right? Generally speaking, we work with NimbeLink and others, and we're providing the service to track their asset, right? And they're doing it through our portal, right? I was going to avoid making this a commercial, but yes, they do this through our portal. They go in, we have all sorts of fun, pretty graphs and maps and all sorts of stuff customized to what they need to do. At the end of the day, it really comes down to the uniqueness of that business. Certainly, the protein industry is awfully different than precast concrete for, prison systems. Right? They both send stuff hundreds of miles away. They both put a lot of assets in the field, and then neither one of them wants to lose them. Right? The rest of the business is awfully different. One cares about temperature, one doesn't. One's completely clean. The other isn't. I'll let you decide which is which.
Yeah, and I look at the broad case of multiple customers. The challenge is connecting the asset to that pallet. So there has to be a workflow. There has to be a working with the organization to determine when they're going to do that. If it's going to be a scanning, and then typically they already have an ERP system that's actually tracking that. Now you're taking that. Whatever the supply is on that reusable transport and moving that, there is some back-end work that typically happens to actually know where those things are.
There's an integration effort.
Yeah,
one of the real surprising learnings for us over the last 3 years was we freely assumed everyone would want us to integrate to their ERP system, which they do, but so that they could manage this from their ERP system. And I have yet to run into a customer that really wants us to do that. What they really want is to keep us separate from their ERP system, feed their ERP into our system so that we don't have to deal with everything going on in their ERP. It can be something that's standalone, even though we're getting that information. So when we're shipping something, or when they're shipping something and we're tracking it, we have all the information about the customer, about the product, about where it's supposed to go, when it's supposed to be there, to whom it's, and that is all populated in it, if that means anything to the customer. So then we can reconcile, it's supposed to be here, it's over there, red alert, send up a notice. Let someone know. There's a discrepancy.
Thanks for the question. Was there so if you have other questions, yeah.
Please.
Right over there. Okay, great.
Hey, thank you for the presentation. I'm, on the sustainability front, I really hear you in terms of no single use, which brings up the sort of next point, which is like, what are you doing in terms of, I'm assuming, a reverse logistics for the devices, right? In some cases, a cartridge for some solutions, in some of the examples I'm working on, is $1,000, so it's worth sort of doing all the reverse logistics to get your things refueled and do all the tracking thereof. But I don't know if you're seeing that there's like that reverse logistics component, I think, is absolutely critical. But I don't know if you got a chance to touch base on it, or if there's a threshold where it becomes.
It's a huge cost driver.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's incredibly specific to that business. So when we were working in the protein industry, we did all the reverse logistics. So we would track the shipment, and then we would manage the assets return, right? And we still do some of that. The overwhelming majority of what we do is just the tracking, and the customer, our customer, is really managing either themselves or with their customer how those assets get back. We're giving them the information to make it more effective. And sometimes that information can be really automated. Enough assets have accumulated at this customer to justify a return trip. Send off an alert to somebody, to their customer, to them, to both, whatever it is. Because we need to have 50 of these things to make a truck worthwhile. Boom, 50 are there now. Send them home.
I think that's the key thing, having the data, because we've seen the use cases where there's a route where the truck would send in one day, they'd get there, and there was enough. There was one, so they load the truck the next day. Next week they get there, they needed 3 trucks, and just the timing of the routing. So having that data is just really critical for the routing managers to actually go out and do that recycling
and to drive cost out of that equation.
Right.
We're talking with a company out west that is looking to drive reusable bottles into the wine industry. And there are dozens and dozens of types of bottles for all different types of wine. They're trying to get it down to 2. And they've got a handful of wineries that have signed up to do this, but make the wine bottles, somewhere between 8 and 25 uses before they themselves need to be returned or recycled. You can imagine the number one cost driver in that equation isn't going to be the glass. It's going to be the reverse logistics. And that's going to make that business model work or not. And the only real input they have that they can really affect is knowing where everything is and where it needs to go. And that's all about tracking those assets. So now we're talking about assets that cost a couple dollars, right? As opposed to assets that cost a couple $1,000s. Same principles, different costs.
You find that as IoT proliferates and mesh networks start to sort of cover the country, there might be alternative options to satellite, beacons, like some of the more expensive.
Oh yeah.
Cell powered or satellite powered to maybe just IoT, simple IoT solution, and sort of where that crossover point looks like.
There are more bells and whistles, and I don't mean that to say that they're just pretty toys. I mean there are options, right? For example, a lot of cases, these assets we don't really need GPS. In fact, I'd say most cases, you don't need the specificity of GPS yet, right? Cellular or Wi-Fi triangulation is just fine. It gets you close enough so that you know where the customer is, and if you know they're geofenced in this customer, there you go. That's enough for most applications. The reason that's important is because it cuts down on the power consumption. The less power used, the longer these assets can last. The longer these assets can last, the less costly they are to run per month. Right? So you're just pulling cost out of the service, the ability to provide this asset tracking service. And at the end of the day, the real driver of importance for that is the lower it costs to do this, the more assets we can track. If we get that cost down, it opens up whole new worlds of assets that we can bring essentially a digital identity to and manage more effectively, driving cost out of the whole thing.
And like I said at the beginning, the technology's here. It's really a matter of understanding the business problem we're trying to solve. So you can converge Bluetooth with cellular or RFID or use some of the other unlicensed technologies of LoRaWAN and Sigfox and satellites. So there's a way to converge these depending on the use case, depending on what we want to bring to bear from a technology point of view. Because one of the areas I was going to, if we had time, we're going to talk about indoor versus outdoor tracking. But to your point, once we understand the economics and understand the business solution, we can bring the technologies together to solve that.
But Scott's right. It's all driven by what's the business trying to accomplish. You can accomplish the same sort of savings in the service if you just have the device show up less frequently, right? If you need to know where it is every 5 minutes, that device is going to burn that battery a lot more quickly. It's going to cost more. If suddenly 2 hours, 4 hours, 2 days, it's a different cost model altogether.
Could you give an example? I mean, you talked about protein. Just to make it a little bit more specific, let's extrapolate here and let's say something like meat that needs to be refrigerated, or something like vaccines that needs to be refrigerated.
All right.
You don't just need to know where your asset is, but the state of what's the condition of this asset. Has it been crushed?
So speaking generally about the protein industry, not about any one customer or any one company. Generally speaking, there is a certain threshold of waste that is cost effective. Anything more than that, the business model suffers. So imagine, if you will, you're using a cold shipper that's driving through Chicago. Chicago has quirky rules because of noise ordinances. Anytime one of these trucks drives through Chicago, they have to turn off the refrigerators. It's true. They actually have to turn the refrigerator off to drive through the Chicagoland area. If you spend too much time in the Chicagoland area with the refrigerator off, everything in back gets a little warmer. Okay? When it finally shows up at the retail outlet or the distribution center or the sausage company or whatever it is, the end customer, there is a certain amount of it that will get disavowed and sent back because of temperature in a situation like that. Knowing that up front or while it's happening allows for some options. One, pull over and turn the refrigerator on, cool the box back down, save all the product. Two, it's too late, let's say, for example, put another box on the road and make sure they don't drive through that traffic jam because there's an accident. So that you don't learn about it when the product is disavowed at the customer, you learn about it 3 hours before and another load is an hour away. And you've maintained your contract with the customer, you've wasted a lot of food, but at least your customer relationship is still happy. That's 2 examples of the sort of thing you can do in that particular case just to avoid one problem, which is spoilage.
Looks like we have time for one more question.
One quick question on ROI. Could you provide some direct examples of ROI that you went into the situation or went into the customer expecting to see the ROI be X, Y, or Z, and what those were? And if you then discovered additional ROI after you engaged and got a better look at the customer problem?
So every industry has sort of its own norms and rhythms. But the one truism that we've experienced across all of industries is that every company and every industry loses a heck of a lot more of their shipping assets than they think. They acknowledge the industry has a 20% annual loss rate, but we're not more than 2 or 3. We can't be. I would know. I'm the shipping coordinator. That company will be 12 to 15 every time. And everyone's eyes go bug, and everyone's terribly surprised, and it's a little embarrassing, but boy, sure is good that we know. I mean, it's always higher than we think. I've never entered a situation where we run a pilot or a study or just implement, and it's not only significantly less, but just at all less than they thought. There's always more loss than people think. The first customer we did together, I've referenced a little bit of it earlier. We thought there would be a first year ROI of, maybe 200%. It was 800%. I mean, that means we weren't charging enough, quite frankly, right? But there was that much that we uncovered. And that was just about loss. That's before we got into actual, the real driving value, which is what the goal should be, and that is the ability to produce more efficiently, and drive the overall cost out of it. That was just preventing loss. But that always, every time I get surprised by that.
Carl, anything else that?
It's time to stop. The thing that I'm most curious about is I've always been trained that unit of measure is what's important, okay? So is there any consistency in the unit of measure other than loss that you've got going on when you're looking at what's going on with the pallets?
So certainly industries that are much more mature, certainly. When you're dealing in the protein industry, every company has their own threshold, and actually every company, every customer of every company, you know, for example, if you're shipping to Walmart, you're gonna have one threshold. If you're shipping to a smaller outlet or some sort of food processor, you're probably gonna have a different one because Walmart's gonna demand a higher standard because of their volume, right? Generally speaking, what we look for are white spaces. We're often looking for that business problem that's been around for a while that no one solved because they didn't think they could, and the whole industry just operates this way. That's the one we want to tackle. Because if you can really fix that, you can transform a little piece of the whole industry for every customer. So we get into those every time, where we're more often than not creating what the new metric is, because no one solved this one before.
Yeah, and I think the chart you have up here, dwell time, is very important, you know, because obviously loss is one thing, then you got to rebuy them. But if dwell time, if you can actually optimize the use of your reusable pallet and use them more efficiently, that's a really good measurement that we're seeing across the industry.
That makes sense. Cool. Yeah. Folks, please give them a round of applause.
Thank you.